The sunlight filtered through the blinds of Westfield Children's Hospital, casting faint stripes across the floor. Hannah Miller adjusted the strap of her bag as she stepped into the pediatric ward. Her footsteps echoed softly, blending with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the occasional murmurs of nurses. Hannah had been working at the hospital for 5 years now. Music therapy had been her Kalinga way to bring light to others' lives after her own dreams of being a concert pianist had crumbled. Yet, as much as she loved her work, there were days when self-doubt crept in like an unwelcome shadow. Today, she had a new patient, Ethan Scott, a 12-year-old boy with a severe heart condition. His case file sat heavy in her hand, filled with medical jargon and somber notes. Withdrawn, difficulty engaging, severe fatigue. She exhaled slowly, trying to push aside the tension curling in her chest. One step at a time, she told herself. When she arrived at Ethan's room, she knocked lightly and peeked inside. The boy was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. His hair was tousled, his skin pale against the white sheets. He looked small, almost swallowed by the medical equipment surrounding him. "Hi, Ethan," Hannah said, stepping in with a warm smile. "I'm Hannah. I'm here to do some music therapy with you." Ethan turned his head just enough to glance at her, his expression unreadable. Hannah pulled a chair close to his bed and set her bag on the floor. "I brought some instruments. We can try them out together if you'd like. Or I can play something for you first." Ethan shrugged. "Doesn't matter." His voice was flat, and his gaze drifted back to the window. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then reached into her bag and pulled out a small melodica. "How about I start with this?" she said, trying to keep her tone light. She began to play a cheerful tune, the melody soft and inviting. The notes filled the room, weaving through the sterile air like a gentle breeze. But Ethan's face remained impassive. His mother, Claire, was standing near the door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She offered Hannah an apologetic smile. "He's not very responsive these days," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "That's okay," Hannah replied, her fingers still moving over the keys. "Music doesn't need words. Sometimes it just takes time." But as she played, a seed of doubt took root in her mind. Would her music reach him? Could it? Later that day, as Hannah packed up her instruments, she noticed Claire lingering in the hallway. "Claire?" Hannah called softly. The woman turned, her face lined with fatigue. She smiled, but it was thin and weary. "I just wanted to thank you for trying. Ethan doesn't open up to anyone. Not to me, not to the doctors. I'm hoping maybe you can reach him." Hannah nodded. "We'll keep trying. It's not always easy at first, but I've seen music do amazing things." Claire's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I just want him to be happy again, even if it's just for a moment." There was a heaviness in her words, a glimpse of the weight she carried every day. As Claire walked away, Hannah couldn't help but wonder how long the woman had been fighting this uphill battle alone. In the weeks that followed, Hannah visited Ethan regularly. Each time, she brought a new instrument: a tambourine, a triangle, a small drum. She tried different songs, switching from playful melodies to soothing harmonies. But Ethan remained stoic, his responses limited to shrugs and monosyllables. One afternoon, determined to try something new, Hannah placed a tambourine on his lap. "Here," she said brightly, "just give it a shake. There's no wrong way to play." Ethan stared at the tambourine for a moment before looking up at her with a faint smile. "What if I throw it out the window?" Hannah chuckled, caught off guard by his sarcasm. "As long as it makes a sound on the way down, I'll count it as progress." To her surprise, Ethan let out a small huff that was almost a laugh. He didn't shake the tambourine, but he didn't push it away either. It wasn't much, but it was something. A week later, Hannah found Ethan sitting on the hospital terrace. The spring breeze ruffled his hair, and his eyes were fixed on the horizon. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, pulling up a chair. Ethan didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. After a moment, Hannah took out her melodica and began to play. The melody was soft and slow, carried by the wind. Ethan listened in silence, his expression thoughtful. "That song," he said finally. "It sounds sad." Hannah paused, her fingers resting on the keys. "It can be," she admitted, "but it can also be hopeful. Music's funny like that, it can hold a lot of feelings at once." Ethan glanced at her. "Do you play because it makes you feel better?" Hannah nodded. "Yeah, I do. Music helps me let things out when I don't know how else to." Ethan didn't say anything more, but his posture softened, and for the first time, Hannah felt a flicker of hope. The hospital terrace had become Ethan's favorite spot, a small sanctuary where the walls of his room didn't feel so close. For Hannah, it was where she finally saw glimmers of the boy behind the guarded demeanor. One afternoon, she found him there again, his knees pulled to his chest, his gaze distant. "What's out there that's so interesting?" Hannah asked as she settled into the chair beside him. "Nothing," Ethan muttered. "Just better than staring at the ceiling." Hannah took out her melodica, cradling it in her lap. "Mind if I play?" Ethan shrugged, which she had come to understand as permission. She started with a slow, thoughtful melody, something soft and meditative. The notes floated on the breeze, weaving through the quiet hum of the hospital grounds. Ethan's head tilted slightly, his eyes narrowing, as if trying to catch every nuance of the tune. "Is that your favorite song or something?" he asked after a long silence. Hannah smiled. "One of them. I like how it changes depending on how I play it. Sometimes it sounds bright, and other times not so much." Ethan nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of the bench. "It sounds like how I feel. Bright and not so much." Hannah stilled for a moment, surprised by the raw honesty in his words. "Well," she said gently, "it sounds like you'd make a great musician." Music has a way of making sense of feelings we can't always explain. Ethan didn't reply, but he didn't pull away either. For Hannah, it was enough. While Ethan began to show small signs of progress, his mother, Claire, continued to shoulder a weight few could imagine. Late one evening, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table of their small apartment. Bills were spread out before her, the stark numbers glaring under the dim light. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The weight of it all pressed down on her, the mounting medical expenses, the long hours at work, the constant fear of losing her son. She reached for her phone, scrolling through old photos of Ethan. In one, he was laughing on a swing, his face alight with joy. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm trying, Ethan," she whispered, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I'm trying so hard." At the hospital, Claire often lingered outside the room during Ethan's sessions with Hannah. One day, as Hannah packed up her instruments, she found Claire waiting in the hallway. "Do you have a minute?" Claire asked. Of course. They walked together to the hospital's small cafe, where Claire stirred her coffee absently. "Do you think he's really improving?" Claire asked, her voice wavering. "I mean, I've seen him smile a little more, but I don't know if it's enough." Hannah placed a reassuring hand on Claire's. "It's a process. With Ethan, it's going to take time, but I see progress. Even the smallest steps matter." Claire nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. "I just want him to have something that makes him happy." Ethan's sessions began to take on a new rhythm. Hannah noticed how his sarcasm softened into something less defensive, more playful. He started asking questions about the instruments she brought, his curiosity flickering like the first sparks of a flame. One day, Hannah set up a small keyboard on a stand. "Okay, today's challenge, I'm going to teach you how to play a song. Think you're up for it?" Ethan crossed his arms, smirking. "Depends. Is it a good song or one of your boring ones?" "Oh, it's good," Hannah replied with mock seriousness. "But it's going to take some skill." Ethan rolled his eyes but moved closer to the keyboard. Hannah guided his hands, showing him the first few notes. "There, now you try." Ethan's fingers pressed the keys hesitantly, the notes coming out uneven but recognizable. "Not bad," Hannah said encouragingly. "I think we've got a future rock star here." Ethan shook his head, but a small smile tugged at his lips. During another session, Ethan surprised her by asking a question of his own. "If I wanted to play an instrument for real, like, learn it, which one should I pick?" Hannah's eyes lit up. "That depends. What kind of sound do you like? Big and loud, soft and smooth?" "Big and loud," Ethan said without hesitation. "Like drums?" Hannah grinned. "Drums, huh? I can definitely see that. They're fun and powerful." Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "Yeah, maybe I'll try that someday." For the first time, he seemed to be imagining a future possibility. But progress is rarely a straight line. One morning, Hannah arrived at the hospital to find Claire in tears. "It's his heart," Claire said, her voice breaking. "The doctors say his condition's worsening. He's back in the ICU." Hannah's chest tightened. She hurried to Ethan's room, where the boy lay pale and fragile, his breathing labored. He opened his eyes when he heard her enter. "Hey," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Hey," Hannah said, sitting beside him. "I brought some music. Thought you might want to hear it." Ethan nodded faintly. Hannah set up her keyboard and began to play his favorite melody, pouring every ounce of emotion into the notes. The music seemed to fill the room, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Ethan's breathing steadied, his eyes fluttering closed as he listened. For the next few days, the ICU became a familiar space for Hannah. She spent every available moment with Ethan, playing music when he was awake and staying quietly nearby when he wasn't. One afternoon, Claire sat beside Hannah in the small waiting room just outside the ICU. She looked more exhausted than ever, her hands trembling as she clutched a paper coffee cup. "I keep asking myself if I'm doing enough," Claire said suddenly, her voice low and strained. "He's been fighting so long, and I don't know if I've made the right choices for him. Maybe if I had caught it earlier, gotten him better doctors." "Claire," Hannah interrupted gently, turning to face her. "You've done everything you could. Ethan knows how much you love him. That's what matters most." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "It's hard to see him like this. He's just a kid, and he's had to deal with so much. It's not fair." Hannah placed a hand on Claire's arm. "You've given him so much strength. He might not say it all the time, but I can see how much he loves you too." Claire let out a shaky breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you, Hannah. I don't know how we'd get through this without you." That evening, as Hannah packed up to leave, a nurse approached her. "Ethan's been asking for you," the nurse said. "He wants to talk to you alone." Surprised, Hannah followed the nurse to Ethan's room. Inside, Ethan was sitting up slightly, the dim light casting shadows across his pale face. Despite his frailty, his eyes held a quiet determination. "Hannah," he said softly as she sat beside him. "Hey, Ethan," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "What's up?" There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again. If something happens to me," he began, his voice faltering, "I want you to tell my mom it's not her fault." Hannah's chest tightened. "Ethan, nothing's going to happen to you. You're strong, and you're going to get through this." Ethan shook his head. "I know you have to say that, but just in case, I don't want her to blame herself. She already does, you know." Hannah fought back tears as she reached for his hand. "I promise, Ethan. But you can tell her yourself, okay? When you're feeling better." Ethan gave her a small, tired smile. "Maybe." In the days that followed, Ethan's condition slowly began to stabilize. The doctors remained cautious, but Claire's relief was palpable as she finally allowed herself to hope again. When Ethan was strong enough to sit up in bed, Hannah brought him a small, portable drum pad. "Okay," she said with a grin. "We're trying something new today. Let's see if you're ready to be a rock star." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is this a trick to make me exercise?" "Absolutely," Hannah replied. "And you're going to love it." Despite his protests, Ethan picked up the drumsticks and began experimenting with the pad. The faint thump of the drums filled the room, uneven at first, but gradually finding a rhythm. "Not bad," Hannah said, clapping her hands. "You've got some natural talent." Ethan smirked. "Don't sound so surprised." As the sessions continued, Ethan's energy returned little by little. He began to look forward to his time with Hannah, and even Claire noticed a difference in his demeanor. "He's been talking about music a lot," Claire confided to Hannah one afternoon. "He asked me if he could take lessons when he gets out of here." Hannah's heart swelled with pride. "That's amazing, Claire. He's starting to imagine a future again." Claire smiled, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "It's because of you. You've given him something to hold on to." While Ethan's recovery brought a sense of hope, it also stirred something unresolved in Hannah. One evening, after leaving the hospital, she found herself sitting at her piano for the first time in months. The instrument had been more of a decoration in her apartment lately, a silent reminder of the career she had abandoned. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant. She thought back to the recital that had derailed everything, the way her hands had frozen, the deafening silence that had followed. The memory still stung, but something about Ethan's courage made her want to try again. She pressed a key tentatively, then another, until a soft melody began to fill the room. The notes were shaky at first, but they grew stronger as she played, weaving into a song she hadn't touched in years. For the first time, the music didn't feel like a weight or a reminder of failure. It felt like coming home. Encouraged by the experience, Hannah decided to visit her parents for the first time in months. Her mother greeted her warmly, though the tension was still there, unspoken but palpable. "We've missed you, Hannah," her father said over dinner. "You don't visit enough." "I've been busy," Hannah replied, her tone defensive. Her mother sighed. "We just worry about you. You were so talented, and now." "I'm still talented," Hannah interrupted, surprising even herself with the conviction in her voice. "I'm helping people, Mum. Maybe it's not the life you pictured for me, but it matters." There was a long silence before her mother nodded. "You're right, it does, and we're proud of you." The words settled over Hannah like a balm, soothing wounds she hadn't realized were still open. Months later, Ethan was finally discharged from the hospital. Hannah stood with Claire as they watched him step outside, the sunlight casting a warm glow on his face. "Thank you," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. I don't know how we would have gotten through this without you." Hannah smiled. "Ethan's the one who did the hard work. I just gave him a little push." Ethan turned and waved at her. "See you around, Hannah." "See you, rock star," she called back, her heart full. One evening, not long after Ethan's discharge, Hannah received a package in the mail. Inside was a photo of Ethan sitting at a drum set, his grin wide and triumphant. A note from Claire accompanied the photo. "He's been practicing every day. You gave him more than music, you gave him hope." Hannah stared at the picture for a long time, her chest swelling with pride and gratitude. That night, she sat at her piano and played for hours, the music flowing freely, unburdened by fear or doubt. She had found her purpose again, and she knew it was only the beginning. Through music, Ethan discovered a reason to dream, and through Ethan, Hannah rediscovered her strength. Sometimes, all it takes is a single melody to change a life, and sometimes, it changes two.